Don't take me home. Take me straight to my lawyer. My father-in-law's fingers tightened around my arm as we left the hospital. Hours earlier. His own children promised they were too busy to pick him up after surgery. I was the only person who drove 310 miles to bring him back. But the moment he closed my car door, I realized something was wrong. He wasn't weak. He wasn't confused. He was terrified. Then he opened a folder from his hospital bag and whispered, "They think I signed everything before the surgery." But to understand what he told me, you need to hear the whole story. The morning my 87-year-old father-in-law was discharged after open-heart surgery, every single person on my wife's side of the family suddenly developed an emergency that did not exist. Lorraine called out from behind our bedroom door at 5:15. Her voice muffled by what she claimed was a migraine so severe she could barely see straight. "Just go without me. Corbin, call me when you get there." Her brother Wade had texted the family group chat at 9 the previous night, an unmovable client meeting in Twin Falls. "Couldn't reschedule. Deeply sorry." Wade's wife, Jolene, had entered a charity golf fundraiser that apparently required her presence at dawn on a Tuesday in January, in Idaho, where the greens were buried under 4 inches of frost. I stood in the kitchen of our home in Meridian, staring at the 3 messages on my phone, and felt something shift behind my ribs that had nothing to do with sympathy. When was the last time all 3 of them were too busy on the same morning, by pure coincidence? I poured coffee into a travel mug, grabbed the duffel bag I had packed the night before, and walked out to my truck alone. The neighborhood was still dark. My name is Corbin Ellsworth. I am 62 years old, and for 38 of those years, I practiced tax law, estate planning, IRS disputes, forensic accounting for clients whose families turned on them the moment the balance sheet got interesting. I retired 5 years ago. But retirement does not erase the instincts, it sharpens them. You stop looking at spreadsheets and start looking at people. The drive from Meridian to St. Alphonsus Regional Medical Center in Boise is not long. But that morning it felt like crossing a border. The highway was empty, the January sky pressing down like a gray lid over the valley, and I drove with both hands on the wheel, and a growing certainty that the coordinated absence of my wife and her family was not laziness. It was strategy. Eugene Ellsworth had owned 350 acres of prime ranch land near Hagerman for 60 years. When he wrote checks, birthdays, holidays, down payments on houses his children could not afford, the family gathered around him like iron filings around a magnet. When he needed someone to drive a 200-mile round trip to bring him home from cardiac surgery, the room emptied. I had seen this arithmetic before. In conference rooms, in probate courts, in the quiet offices where adult children sat across from me and practiced their grief, while I traced the signatures on documents they had already forged. The hospital corridor smelled the way institutions always smell, like someone had scrubbed the grief off the floor but left the stain underneath. I found Eugene in a wheelchair near the discharge desk, and the sight of him stopped me mid-stride. Paper-thin skin stretched over bones that seemed to have shrunk since the surgery. A raw surgical scar ran the length of his sternum, visible where his gown had slipped. Purple fatigue pooled beneath his eyes like bruises. His hands lay flat on the armrests, and his head tilted slightly forward, as though holding it upright required more energy than he had. 87 years old, open-heart surgery 6 days ago. Alone in a hospital corridor at 10 in the morning, without a single blood relative in sight. I signed the discharge papers, wheeled him through the automatic doors, and loaded him into the passenger seat of my truck with the careful, practice motions you learn when fragile people depend on you. I buckled his seatbelt, adjusted the headrest, closed the door gently, walked around to the driver's side, put the key in the ignition, and reached for the gear shift. That was when his hand shot out and locked around my wrist. His grip was not the grip of a sick man. It was the grip of a man who had been waiting for the only person he still trusted to walk through that door. I looked down at his fingers, white-knuckled, trembling, but iron-tight. And then I looked at his face, The slumped posture was gone. The cloudy fatigue in his eyes had burned away like fog in direct sunlight. What remained was something I had never seen in 35 years of knowing this man. Raw, undisguised terror. "Skip the house," he said. His voice was raspy from the intubation tube, but every word landed like a hammer on an anvil. "Drive straight to your lawyer's office. Do not tell Lorraine. Do not tell anyone. Just drive." I did not ask why. I did not ask what had happened. In 38 years of sitting across from people whose families were consuming them alive, I had learned exactly one thing about moments like this. When a man that old, that proud, and that stubborn grips your wrist and tells you to run, you do not ask questions. You drive. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the hospital parking lot. Eugene stared straight ahead through the windshield, his jaw clenched, his breathing shallow and deliberate. Whatever had happened in that house before his heart gave out, it was bad enough to make an 87-year-old rancher afraid to go home. And whatever he needed a lawyer for, it was urgent enough that he had waited through 6 days of recovery, alone, saving his strength for this single request. The highway stretched out ahead of us, empty and frozen, and I drove toward the only attorney I trusted with the kind of trouble I could already feel forming at the edges of this silence. Before I tell you what Eugene said on that highway, let me explain why a retired tax attorney was the last person his children expected to be a threat. If you are enjoying this story, do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop a like. It helps more than you know. And trust me, this story is just getting started. I spent 38 years building a career on one specific talent, finding the lies people bury inside legal documents and financial ledgers. Estate planning, federal tax litigation, forensic accounting for families who smiled at Thanksgiving and stole from each other by Christmas. I sat across conference tables from people who had forged their mother's signatures, backdated trust amendments, and rerouted retirement accounts through shell companies with names designed to look boring enough that nobody would ever search for them. I found every single one. Then I retired. Moved to Meridian with Lorraine. Traded my briefcase for a tackle box. And let my wife's family believe exactly what they wanted to believe, that I was a harmless old man who spent his mornings on the porch reading paperback westerns and his afternoons trying to catch trout in the Boise River. You do not spend nearly 4 decades auditing fraud cases without learning to hear the specific frequency of a lie, even when it comes from the people sitting at your own dinner table. Lorraine's family never asked about my career. Not once in 31 years of marriage. They knew I had been some kind of lawyer. They assumed estate planning meant I helped old people write wills and organize filing cabinets. They had no idea that the quiet man who refilled their wine glasses at holiday dinners had once dismantled a $14 million Ponzi scheme run by a county treasurer in Twin Falls, or that I had personally delivered forensic evidence to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division on 3 separate occasions. They saw a retiree. They were about to discover how catastrophically wrong they were. But I need to go back to the hospital for a moment. Back to the discharge desk. 20 minutes before I loaded Eugene into the truck. I was signing the final release forms when a young nurse behind the counter, tired eyes, clipboard thick with overnight paperwork, her badge reading Colby, leaned across the desk and mentioned it almost as an afterthought. "Your father-in-law's son called about an hour ago," she said, not looking up from her screen. "He didn't ask about medications or recovery instructions. He just wanted to know if Mr. Ellsworth had signed any legal releases during his stay, or if medical power of attorney had been transferred to hospital staff." I kept my face neutral. 38 years of depositions teach you that skill before anything else. "Did he leave a message for Eugene?" I asked. "No," Nurse Colby said. "He just asked those 2 questions and hung up." When was the last time a loving son called a hospital and forgot to ask whether his father could walk? I set the pen down on the clipboard. and let the question settle into the part of my brain that had spent decades sorting harmless coincidences from the first threads of something criminal. Wade had not asked about his father's blood pressure, had not asked about the surgical wound, the medications, the physical therapy schedule, or whether the 87-year-old man who had just survived open-heart surgery was strong enough to climb the 3 steps to his own front porch. He had called a hospital at 9 in the morning and asked 2 questions, both about legal documents, both about authority, both about control. In my old profession, that pattern had exactly one name. It was called positioning, and it meant someone was preparing to make a move on a vulnerable person's assets before that person had the strength to fight back. I thanked Nurse Colby, picked up my copy of the discharge papers, and walked down the corridor toward Eugene's wheelchair. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The linoleum squeaked under my shoes. Somewhere behind a curtain, a monitor beeped in the steady rhythm of a heart that was still working. That single phone call from Wade was like a single mismatched digit in a tax return, small enough to miss if you were not trained to look for it. Devastating enough to unravel everything if you were. I had been trained to look for it. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing straight up by the time I reached Eugene's wheelchair. He looked up at me with those bruised, exhausted eyes. And I almost told him right there. Almost said. "Your son called this hospital an hour ago and he did not ask a single question about your health." But I did not, because I needed to hear what Eugene already knew before I showed him what I had just learned. So I wheeled him out, loaded him into the truck, buckled his seatbelt, and waited for the old man to tell me what had broken his heart, before the surgery ever opened his chest. And then his hand locked around my wrist. And he told me to drive. I pulled onto the highway toward Boise with my father-in-law in the passenger seat, and a cold feeling climbing the back of my skull. Wade had not called that hospital to check on his father. He had called to check on a transaction. And in my experience, when someone treats a family member like a line item on a balance sheet, the worst part of the story has not happened yet. 10 miles down the highway, Eugene stopped staring at the dashboard and began to speak. The voice that came out of him was not the voice of a recovering patient. It was the voice of a man who had been rehearsing this story in a hospital bed for 6 days, waiting for the one person he trusted to finally walk through the door. "They came to my house 3 weeks ago," he said. His hands were flat on his thighs, pressing down as though trying to hold himself steady. Wade and Lorraine. No phone call. No warning. Just headlights in my driveway at 8:30 on a Tuesday night. I kept my eyes on the road and let him talk. Eugene said Wade walked in first, carrying a manila folder thick with legal documents. Lorraine followed. They sat him down at his own desk in the study, the same desk where he had managed the ranch's finances for 6 decades, and Wade fanned the papers across the surface like a dealer laying out cards. Transfer documents, deed reassignment forms, a new will template with Wade's name already typed into the beneficiary line. "He wanted me to sign over the ranch," Eugene said. "All 350 acres, right there at my desk, with a pen he brought from his own pocket." He was sweating, pacing back and forth behind my chair, shouting that he needed it done immediately, that there were debts I did not understand, that if I did not sign, the government would take the land anyway. "What did you say?" I asked. I told him no. His iron facade cracked for just a moment, and I saw the thing hiding beneath it not anger, but the raw, agonizing wound of a father who finally understood that his own blood had chosen money over his life. I told him that ranch was built with 60 years of my labor, and it was not his to take. Eugene continued. I told him to get those papers off my desk and get out of my house. That is when Lorraine moved. I felt my grip tighten on the steering wheel. She stood in front of the study door, he said. Not aggressive, not threatening, just standing there with her arms crossed, blocking the only way out. And Wade kept pacing and shouting, louder and louder, until the walls felt like they were closing in. Eugene paused. His breathing had changed, shorter, shallower. The rhythm of a man reliving a moment his body still remembered. The pressure hit my chest like a sledgehammer, he said quietly. I tried to stand, my legs gave out. I went down on the hardwood floor, and I could feel my heart doing something it was never designed to do. The highway hummed beneath the tires. I waited. They did not come to help me, Eugene said. They did not kneel down beside him. They did not loosen his collar or call his name. They did not press their hands against his chest or shout for help. His own son and his own daughter stood at the top of the hallway and watched him clutch his sternum on the hardwood floor of the house he had built with his bare hands. And then they walked out the front door. Wade grabbed the papers off the desk, Eugene said. Lorraine picked up her purse. They turned off the porch light and drove away. I lay on that floor for I do not know how long. Could have been 20 minutes. Could have been an hour. I heard my own breathing echoing off the ceiling, and I thought, this is how it ends. Face down on the floor of your own house. And the people who are supposed to love you just turned off the light. I could smell the hospital still clinging to his clothes, antiseptic, and stale linen, and the chemical sweetness of whatever they had pumped through his IV. The smell of a man who had survived something his family had hoped he would not. How did the ambulance find you? I asked, though some part of me already knew the answer would be worse than the question. They called it in, Eugene said. Wade and Lorraine. But not from the house, not from the driveway. They drove 2 towns over and called 911 from a gas station payphone so no one would know they had been there when it happened. The paramedics found me on the floor with the study door still open and every light in the house turned off. No one called the ambulance right away. In 38 years of tax law, I had traced money through shell companies, offshore accounts, and forged ledgers. I had sat across from people who had stolen their parents' retirement funds and smiled about it in depositions. But I had never felt the trail lead somewhere this cold. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, staring at the gray ribbon of highway ahead. The pieces were snapping together with a clarity that made my stomach turn. Wade's phone call to the hospital about legal paperwork. Lorraine's perfectly timed migraine this morning. The synchronized absence of every family member on discharge day. This was not a family avoiding responsibility. This was a conspiracy actively in motion. And my wife was standing in the middle of it. I pressed the accelerator and aimed the truck toward downtown Boise. Eugene had asked me to drive to my lawyer's office, and now I understood why. Whatever Wade had started in that study 3 weeks ago, he had not stopped. And the man sitting beside me knew it. The thing about living with a liar for 31 years is that you stop noticing the lies until the day you realize you were trained not to notice them. I drove toward downtown Boise with Eugene silent in the passenger seat, and my mind tearing through the last 2 weeks like an auditor ripping through a falsified ledger. The signs had been there. Every single one. I had simply refused to read them. 2 weeks of whispered phone calls in the kitchen that stopped the instant I walked in. 2 weeks of Lorraine changing the subject whenever I mentioned visiting her father. 2 weeks of a woman who once called the hospital 3 times a day when our neighbor had a hip replacement, suddenly showing zero interest in her own father's cardiac recovery. She had not asked me a single question about Eugene's surgical prognosis, not one. She had asked me twice whether he had mentioned any paperwork. How do you share a pillow with someone for 31 years and never once suspect that the silence between you is not comfort, it is concealment? In tax litigation, we called this behavior pattern a coordination signal. Multiple parties acting independently toward the same objective without any visible communication. Except this time, the parties were not corporate officers hiding revenue. They were my wife and her brother. And the objective was an 87-year-old man sitting 3 feet from me with surgical staples still holding his chest together. I pulled into the underground parking garage of a limestone office building on 8th and Main. Eugene had not told me who his lawyer was. He had simply given me the address. And I had recognized it immediately. Sterling Harrington, 59 years old, silver-haired, impeccably tailored. and built like a man who had played defensive end at Boise State 40 years ago and never fully stopped training. He was the kind of attorney other attorneys warned their clients about. I had referred 3 clients to him over the years, all of them facing threats that required someone willing to fight in the mud without getting any on his suit. Sterling did not offer us coffee. He did not ask how Eugene was feeling. He locked the mahogany door behind us, closed the blinds on the 7th-floor windows, and sat down behind his desk with a manila folder already positioned at the center. "How much has he told you?" Sterling asked, looking at me. "Enough to know his children tried to kill him with a stack of legal papers," I said. Sterling nodded once, opened the folder, and slid it across the desk. "Your brother-in-law filed this 3 days ago," he said, his voice low and measured. "Emergency conservatorship petition." He swore before a judge that Eugene is suffering from advanced post-surgical psychosis, violent episodes, inability to feed himself, complete cognitive collapse. "Every word of it is perjury." I picked up the document. The filing was clean, professional, formatted with the kind of precision that meant Wade had hired someone expensive. The affidavit claimed Eugene had attacked a nurse, refused medication, and been found wandering the cardiac ward at 2 in the morning, unable to state his own name. I looked at the man sitting beside me, lucid, sharp-eyed, furious, and felt something toxic rise in my throat. "There is more," Sterling said. He pulled a second page from the folder. He secured a preliminary psychiatric hold, signed by a doctor named Caldwell. I have never heard of him. Which means he was found specifically for this purpose. That signature is the loaded weapon in this entire scheme. Sterling leaned forward and tapped the page with one finger. "If you take Eugene anywhere they can find him, his house, your house, any address connected to his name, Wade calls the police, presents this medical order, and officers will be legally required to physically remove your father-in-law and transport him to a locked psychiatric facility. Once he is inside and sedated, a judge finalizes the conservatorship without Eugene ever speaking for himself. Wade gets the keys to everything, the ranch, the accounts, the legacy, and it will all be perfectly legal. Let me be absolutely clear about what that paperwork meant. A man who had just survived open-heart surgery, 94-pound surgical staples still in his sternum, really strong enough to climb into my truck, could be dragged from his own home by uniformed officers and locked in a room where his son controlled whether he ever spoke to another human being again. Not because he was sick, because his son had paid a stranger to write a lie on a medical form. Eugene sat in the leather chair beside me, staring at the psychiatric hold order with an expression I had only seen once before. On the face of a client who had discovered his own children had emptied his retirement fund while he was undergoing chemotherapy. The look of a person absorbing the full weight of a betrayal so complete that the mind cannot process it as a single event. It has to take it in pieces. "If you take him home," Sterling said quietly, "they can seize him." I sat frozen, staring at the forged doctor's signature. Eugene could not go home. He could not come to my house. Every door in the state of Idaho that had his name attached to it was a trap door leading straight into Wade's hands. The parking garage was silent beneath us. The fluorescent light above Sterling's desk hummed like a wire under tension. We had to make an 87-year-old man disappear completely. Tonight. The underground parking garage of the Residence Inn in Eagle was cold and silent. Exactly the kind of place where a man hides his 87-year-old father-in-law from his own children. I parked in the darkest corner, away from the security cameras, and left Eugene in the truck with the engine running, inside the leasing office. I paid for a week in cash and registered under the name David Mercer. No credit card, no vehicle information. The night clerk did not ask questions. Cash has a way of simplifying conversations. I walked Eugene through the side entrance, one arm around his waist, his weight leaning into me with every step. The suite was on the 2nd floor. Heavy blackout curtains, a full kitchen, and a deadbolt that could stop a battering ram. It was not a hotel room. It was a bunker. And the man inside it was hiding from his own bloodline. I stocked the refrigerator with soup and protein shakes, set his medications on the nightstand in order, checked every window latch. Then I stood at the door and looked at the man sitting in the armchair, surgical scar beneath his shirt, hands folded, eyes steady. "Keep the door locked," I said. "Do not answer the phone. Do not open the door for anyone. I will be back before 8. Eugene settled deeper into the chair and looked at me with an expression that cut through every layer of composure I had left. "What are you going to do now?" he asked. That question turned my blood to ice, because the answer was the hardest thing I had ever done. I had to drive home and pretend I did not know what my wife had become. I pulled the deadbolt shut, tested the handle twice, and walked back to the truck. The call came 11 minutes into the drive back to Meridian. I let the phone ring 3 times before answering. Not because I needed time to think, but because I needed to swallow the rage sitting at the base of my throat like a stone. "Where are you?" Lorraine's voice came through the speakers, breathless, pitched high with panic. "The hospital says Dad was discharged hours ago. Where is my father?" Lorraine Ellsworth is 57 years old. For 31 years she has been my wife. The woman who organizes charity auctions, hosts book clubs, and sends handwritten thank you cards. She is also apparently the woman who blocked her father's study door while her brother screamed him into cardiac arrest. I kept my voice flat, exhausted. The voice of a tired man, not a man dismantling a conspiracy. "He had a dizzy spell on the highway," I said. "I took him to a clinic on the east side, Overland Medical, near the freeway. They want to monitor his blood pressure. Nothing serious." Silence. 2 seconds. 3. Then Lorraine's voice came back, and the shift was so subtle that anyone who had not spent decades listening for lies would have missed it. The panic drained from her tone like water through a crack. What replaced it was flatter, harder, and far more controlled. "Oh, thank goodness," she said. "Just keep me updated, and don't move him without telling me first." Click. She did not ask what caused the dizzy spell, did not ask which doctor was treating him, did not ask if her father was scared or in pain. She asked me not to move him without telling her first. That is not the language of a worried daughter. That is the language of a logistics coordinator confirming a delivery schedule. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and a false clinic name sitting between us like a tripwire. Overland Medical was a real building, a dermatology practice that closed at 5. If Wade showed up there tonight, I would know exactly who Lorraine had called the moment she hung up. The house was quiet. Lorraine stood in the upstairs hallway in her thick bathrobe, pressing her fingertips against her temples in her migraine performance. She asked if I was hungry. I said no. She touched my shoulder as I passed, and her hand felt like it belonged to a stranger. I brushed my teeth, changed, climbed into bed. She turned off her lamp, and within 15 minutes her breathing dropped into the slow rhythm of sleep. For 31 years, that sound had been the most comforting thing in my world. Tonight it made my skin crawl. I lay on my back in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. I had planted a false location, a clinic that would be dark and empty by now. If Wade showed up there tonight looking for Eugene, I would have my answer about exactly who Lorraine was calling the moment I hung up the phone. And if he did not show up, it only meant she was smarter than I hoped. Either way, the woman breathing beside me was not the woman I had married. And somewhere across town, behind a dead-bolted door in a room registered to a man who did not exist, my father-in-law was sleeping alone for the first time in 60 years because his own children had made it unsafe for him to go home. At exactly 2 in the morning, I eased out from under the covers without making a sound and walked barefoot across the carpet toward the one room in this house that was about to tell me the truth my wife never would. Lorraine did not stir. Her breathing held its rhythm, the sleep of a woman who believed her secrets were still safe. I closed the bedroom door behind me and moved down the hallway. Her home office was a small room at the end of the hall. A desk cluttered with charity committee binders and a desktop computer she used for bills and correspondence. I locked the door, sat down, and pressed the power button. The login prompt blinked at me in the darkness. She used the same password for everything the year we were married, followed by our zip code. I used to find that charming. Tonight it felt like an unlocked door to a crime scene. From my jacket I pulled the encrypted flash drive I had kept in my truck since retirement, loaded with the forensic auditing software I had used during my years in federal tax litigation. The program scans bank records, recovers deleted files, and maps financial transactions across linked accounts. I had used it to dismantle corporate fraud. Tonight I was pointing it at my own marriage. The pale glow of the monitor cast the room in the cold blue light of an operating theater. And I was about to cut open 31 years of trust with a digital scalpel. This was not a quick glance at browser history. This was a full digital autopsy. I opened every banking bookmark, every saved PDF, every download folder. Lorraine kept meticulous records. Charity receipts organized by quarter, household expenses sorted by category, our joint accounts bookmarked in a folder labeled Family Finances. The tidy precision that made her excellent at managing a household made her terrible at hiding from a forensic auditor. The software completed its first pass in 11 minutes. 47 flagged items, mostly routine payments, subscriptions, insurance premiums. I cleared them one by one. Then I reached item 31. People always think dragging a file to the trash erases it. They never realize the ghost of that document remains on the hard drive, waiting for someone who knows where to look. The software had recovered a deleted bank statement from August. Our joint retirement account built over 3 decades of combined contributions. The balance was $15,000 lower than it should have been. An outgoing wire transfer, dated August 14th, routed through a holding company called Gallatin Advisory Group, a limited liability company. I had never heard of it. The registration address was a commercial mailbox service in Boise. The memo line was blank except for 2 letters. WP. I sat very still and let those 2 letters burn into my retinas. Wade Ellsworth. $15,000 from our retirement account, routed through a shell company, carrying my brother-in-law's initials in the one field most people never check. Lorraine had authorized this transfer. Her login, her banking session, her digital fingerprint on every click. WP. 2 letters in a memo field that should have been empty, glowing on the screen like a fingerprint left at a crime scene by someone who never expected the detective to be sleeping down the hall. I opened the full transaction history and scrolled backward. The account balance in July was already lower than I remembered from our last joint review in June. Earlier transactions might be hiding in different routing channels, through accounts I did not yet know existed. In 38 years of tax law, I learned one rule that never failed. A single irregular transaction is never single. It is always the first thread. And when you pull it, the entire garment comes apart. I copied everything to the flash drive, every statement, every recovered file, every cached banking page. Then I cleared the browser history, wiped the search logs, powered down the computer, and unplugged the drive. I walked back down the hallway on bare feet that made no sound on the carpet. Lorraine was still sleeping. Same position, same breathing, same woman I had loved since I was 31 years old. Now separated from me by a wire transfer and 2 letters that changed everything. I slid under the covers and stared at the ceiling. The flash drive pressed warm against my thigh. $15,000 was not enough to save a man drowning in the kind of debt Wade carried. Which meant this was not the theft. It was the first installment. And if there was a first installment, there were others hiding in those files. And the total was going to be a number that would make me sick. My phone showed 3:47 a.m. In 4 hours, I needed to be back at the Residence Inn before Eugene woke up. In 4 hours, I needed to look my wife in the eye over morning coffee and pretend I had not just found the first proof that she was stealing from us both. I had slept for 3 hours with the flash drive still in my pocket when the brass knocker on my front door slammed 3 times at exactly 8:15 in the morning. Not the polite knock of a neighbor, the hard, authoritative strike of someone who had brought the law with him. I was already dressed. I had been sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee since 6, waiting for exactly this. The false clinic address I had given Lorraine last night was a dermatology office that would have been dark and locked by the time anyone checked. If Wade was at my door this early, it meant one of 2 things. Either he had sent someone to Overland Medical last night and found nothing, or Lorraine had told him the story was suspicious. Either way, she had made the call. I opened the front door. Wade Ellsworth stood on my porch in a wrinkled charcoal suit that looked like he had slept in it. Mitch, 3 years old, my wife's younger brother. A man who had spent his adult life bouncing between failed business ventures funded by his father's generosity. His bloodshot eyes darted between the uniformed man beside him and my doorframe, with the desperate energy of a man running out of moves. The uniform belonged to Deputy Holt. Young, clean-shaved jaw, one hand resting on his utility belt, doing his best to keep a family dispute from becoming a felony arrest. Wade shoved a crumpled stack of papers at my chest before I could speak. "Where is my father?" he said. His voice was too loud for 8 in the morning. Too loud for a residential street, pitched at the exact frequency designed to make a deputy feel like action was required. "The hospital says he was discharged into your care, and nobody has seen him since. You kidnapped him." The word kidnapping hung in the crisp January air like a grenade with the pin already pulled. It was a heavy, dangerous word, chosen specifically to force the deputy's hand. "Sir," Deputy Holt said, his tone professional but firm, "your brother-in-law has filed an emergency missing person report, along with a conservatorship order signed by a judge. He claims his father is suffering from severe dementia and requires immediate psychiatric evaluation. Can you tell me where Mr. Ellsworth is right now?" I looked at the papers Wade had shoved at me. Crumpled but legible. The conservatorship petition I had already seen in Sterling's office. Plus a new addition. A missing, vulnerable adult report filed at 6:47 this morning. Wade had been busy since dawn. In my old profession, when the executives start slamming their fists on the table and screaming for you to leave the room, that is the exact moment you know you have found where the money went. Panic is never random. It is always a map pointing directly at whatever they are trying to hide. I kept my voice level. "Deputy, I appreciate you coming out. I picked up my father-in-law from the hospital yesterday as planned. He is safe and receiving appropriate medical care. I am happy to cooperate fully." "Then where is he?" Wade stepped forward, trying to push past the deputy. "If he is safe, tell us where he is, right now." "Mr. Ellsworth," Deputy Holt said, putting one hand on Wade's chest without looking at him. "Step back, please." That was when Lorraine appeared on the staircase behind me. "Corbin, what is going on?" Her voice trembled with precisely calibrated confusion. She tightened her bathrobe at the waist and descended 3 steps, her hand trailing the banister. "Wade, what are the police doing here? Tell them where my father is, please." Her performance was flawless. The quivering lip, the wide, searching eyes, the unshed tears catching the morning light through the foyer window. And if I had not spent the night reading her financial records, I would have believed every syllable. But I had. And what I saw on that staircase was not a confused wife caught in a family crisis. It was a woman who had known Wade was coming this morning and had prepared her entrance. The timing was too precise, the phrasing too polished. She had not said, "What's happening?" like a person woken by commotion. She had said, "Tell them where my father is." The exact framing that positioned me as the one withholding information and her as the concerned daughter demanding answers. 31 years of marriage. 31 years of trusting the woman on those stairs. And she was performing for a deputy she had helped summon. Wade seized on Lorraine's entrance like a prosecutor calling his star witness. He pointed past me into the living room. "Deputy, I demand you search this property right now. My father is 87 years old with a serious heart condition, and this man is hiding him from his own family." Deputy Holt looked at the crumpled papers in Wade's hand, then looked at me. His expression was professional, but the meaning was clear. If I was harboring a vulnerable adult against a lawful medical order, I was committing a felony. He needed to come inside. Behind me. Lorraine sobbed quietly into her hands. Wade was practically climbing over the deputy's shoulder. The January cold pressed through the open doorway. I did not argue. I did not panic. I reached into my back pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened the video Sterling had helped me record at the Residence Inn at 6:30 that morning. Then I stepped back and pulled the front door wide open. "Come in, deputy," I said. "I have something you need to see before you search anything." I walked to the coffee table, picked up my tablet, and handed it directly to Deputy Holt, completely ignoring the man who had just accused me of a felony. "Before you search anything," I said, "watch this. 60 seconds. The deputy took the tablet. Wade lunged for it. Deputy Holt stopped him with one raised hand, without looking away from the screen. The video was 2 minutes and 14 seconds long. I had recorded it at the Residence Inn at 6:30 that morning, with Sterling Harrington standing just off camera as a legal witness. Eugene sat in the armchair wearing a clean flannel shirt, his hands folded, his eyes clear. "My name is Eugene Ellsworth," he said on the screen. His voice was raspy but steady as a surveyor's line. "I am 87 years old. Today's date is January 7th, 2025. I am of entirely sound mind and body. I am currently in hiding because my son Wade physically cornered me in my own home and caused the cardiac event that put me in the hospital. I have retained legal counsel. I do not wish to be contacted by my son or return to any location where he can access me." The deputy watched in silence. When the video ended, he lowered the tablet slowly and turned to Wade. The color drained from Wade's face so completely, he looked like a man watching his own obituary being read aloud. Deputy Holt checked the timestamp against the missing person report, then glanced at the attorney's name and bar number printed in the video's corner overlay, details Sterling had insisted on including for exactly this moment. "You told my dispatch you had a missing vulnerable adult suffering from severe cognitive collapse," Deputy Holt said, his voice dropping to the flat, cold register that law enforcement reserves for people who have wasted their time with lies. "This video shows a perfectly lucid man retaining legal counsel and making a domestic abuse allegation against you. You are dangerously close to catching a felony charge for filing a false police report. I strongly suggest you leave this property." "That video is fake," Wade said, his voice cracking upward. He jabbed his finger at the screen. "He forced him to read a script. That old man doesn't know what day it is." "Mr. Ellsworth," the deputy said. "Leave. Now." Wade opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Lorraine on the staircase. She gave him nothing. She was still performing the tearful wife, but her audience had stopped watching. Deputy Holt stepped past me, walked Wade to the edge of the porch, and stood there until my brother-in-law climbed into his silver sedan and pulled away from the curb. The deputy nodded at me once, got into his cruiser, and left. The front door closed, and then the real Lorraine appeared. The fake tears dried up in an instant, replaced by something I had never seen on her face. Pure, undiluted venom aimed directly at the man she had shared a bed with for 31 years. She came down the last 3 steps and planted herself in the foyer, with her hands clenched at her sides and her jaw set like a woman who had stopped pretending anything. "Stop this right now," she said. Her voice was not trembling anymore. It was shrill and hard, and nothing like the woman who had sobbed for the deputy. "You have no right to do this. You have no right to interfere with my family. Wade is going to lose everything. You don't understand what's at stake here. I looked at the woman I had married. She was not asking me to help her father. She was demanding I step aside so her brother could finish what he started. Every whispered phone call, every deflected question, every perfectly timed migraine. All of it had been scaffolding for this. A woman who believed her husband would fold under pressure and deliver an old man into her brother's hands. She had chosen her side. She had chosen it weeks ago. I did not answer her. I walked past her and went upstairs. I pulled a leather suitcase from the top shelf of the bedroom closet and opened it on the bed. I packed without folding shirts, socks, 2 pairs of shoes, a jacket, the encrypted flash drive from my pocket. I took my passport from the nightstand drawer. I zipped the suitcase shut. Lorraine followed me to the bedroom door. "Where are you going? You cannot just leave. We need to talk about this." I did not slam the door. I did not raise my voice. In 38 years of professional work, I learned that the most devastating exit is the one made in total silence. Because silence tells the other person you have already stopped listening. I picked up the suitcase and walked past her. She smelled like the lavender soap she had used every morning for the entire length of our marriage. And for one heartbeat, that scent nearly broke me. Then I kept walking. Down the stairs, through the foyer, out the front door. I threw the suitcase into the passenger seat and started the engine. I did not look at the house in the rearview mirror. I did not look at Lorraine standing in the doorway. 31 years of marriage ended in a foyer, not with a scream, not with a slammed door, but with the quiet click of a suitcase latch and the sound of tires pulling out of the driveway. The lines were drawn. The woman watching me leave had chosen her side, and I had chosen mine. I pulled onto the highway and pointed the truck toward Eagle. Eugene was waiting. Sterling was waiting. And somewhere in the files on that flash drive, a trail of stolen money was waiting to tell me exactly how deep this betrayal ran, if Wade wanted to play dirty by paying off a shady doctor. Sterling Harrington was going to bury him under the kind of medical authority that no judge in Idaho could ignore. I arrived at the Residence Inn with my suitcase and found Sterling already in the suite. Laptop open on the dining table, 3 appointments confirmed. He had spent the previous evening calling in favors across the state's psychiatric community. These were not general practitioners pulled from a phone book. The first was the head of geriatric neurology at Boise State. The second was a cognitive decline specialist who regularly testified in federal court. The third was a woman named Dr. Elaine Whitfield, board-certified in geriatric psychiatry for 26 years, silver hair, reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose, and a reputation for being impossible to influence. They arrived at staggered intervals throughout the morning. Each one went into the bedroom alone with Eugene and closed the door. Each one ran the full battery short-term memory, long-term recall, spatial awareness, executive functioning, sequential reasoning. I sat in the living room and listened to the muffled sounds of an old man proving he still had every faculty his son had sworn he had lost. The first doctor emerged after 45 minutes and gave Sterling a nod. The second came out after an hour and asked me where Eugene had practiced law. Because his analytical recall was sharper than most of her colleagues. Then Dr. Whitfield stepped out of the bedroom, closed the door behind her, and looked at me with a genuine smile. "Your father-in-law is one of the sharpest men I've evaluated this year," she said. He recounted the details of his confrontation with perfect sequential clarity. He understands exactly what is happening to him, exactly who is doing it, and exactly why. There is no cognitive impairment, none. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding for 3 hours. If Eugene had stumbled on even a single question, Wade could have dragged this fight through the courts for years. All 3 doctors signed legal affidavits under oath. Sterling gathered the pages into a folder and tapped it against the table, like a man loading a weapon. "The fraudulent psychiatric hold is dead," he said. 3 independent specialists, all board certified, all under oath. And the doctor who signed Wade's original order is going to be explaining himself to the medical licensing board before the month is over. Eugene appeared in the bedroom doorway, leaning against the frame, tired but steady. "How did I do?" he asked. "You just built a fortress they can never tear down," I said. He nodded once and went back to his armchair. Sterling packed up his laptop and left with the affidavits. The suite went quiet. Eugene fell asleep in the chair with a blanket across his lap. And for the first time in 3 days, the lines around his mouth softened into something that looked almost like peace. I should have felt relief. Part of me did. But the other part, the part that had spent decades reading documents the way a surgeon reads an X-ray, was already pulling me back to the dining table and the conservatorship filing I had brought from Sterling's office. I spread the pages under the desk lamp and started reading from the beginning. Not the medical section this time. The attestation section. Page 11. The witness certification, the part of the filing where a family member signs under penalty of perjury that the subject shows observable signs of cognitive decline. Someone had signed that page. The handwriting hit me like a fist to the sternum. The loops on the capital L were identical. The way the final stroke trailed upward at the end. I had seen that exact motion 1,000 times on notes pinned to the refrigerator, on birthday cards, on grocery lists, on the love letter she had written me on our 20th anniversary that I still kept in the top drawer of my desk. I set the page down and pressed my palms flat against the table to stop them from shaking. I had seen that handwriting on 31 years of birthday cards, grocery lists, and notes left on the kitchen counter. I knew those slanted T-crossings. I knew the way the last letter always drifted slightly upward, as if the hand writing it was already moving on to the next thought. It was the penmanship of a woman who wrote quickly and confidently. A woman who never hesitated with a pen in her hand. If I was right, and every trained instinct I had was screaming that I was, then Lorraine had not simply looked the other way while her brother attacked their father. She had picked up a pen and personally sworn on paper that Eugene Ellsworth was losing his mind. She had certified in writing that the sharpest 87-year-old man 3 psychiatrists had ever tested was cognitively incompetent. She had handed her brother the legal ammunition to lock her own father in a ward. I needed a handwriting sample to be certain. A canceled check, a signed form, anything with her full legal signature for comparison. I needed to be sure. And I was terrified of being sure. I sat alone at the dining table, long after the lamp had warmed the wood beneath my hands, staring at that signature. Eugene slept in his chair across the room, breathing the slow breath of a man who trusted me to protect him. Outside the window, the January dark pressed against the glass like a held breath. The signature stared back. Familiar curves, familiar slant, familiar trailing upstroke, waiting for me to stop hoping and start knowing. I left the signature question for the morning and drove to the Fred Meyer in Nampa the next afternoon to stock up on groceries for Eugene. Oatmeal, bottled water, canned soup, the small provisions of a man in hiding. I was loading the bags into the back seat of my truck when the roar of a heavy diesel engine tore through the quiet parking lot like a warning shot. A lifted black pickup with mud-caked wheel wells swerved across 2 empty lanes and stopped diagonally behind my truck, pinning it against the concrete median. The driver's door swung open, and out stepped Brent Oakley, 54 years old, Wade's longtime business associate, owner of a small excavation company that poured foundations and dug drainage ditches across the Treasure Valley. I had spoken to him maybe 15 times in a decade of family barbecues. He had never once driven across 2 towns to find me in a parking lot. He was not here to talk about barbecues. Brent crossed the asphalt in 4 heavy strides, work boots cracking against the pavement, and stopped 18 inches from my face. He smelled of stale beer and cheap aftershave, and the veins along his neck were standing out like electrical cables under the skin. In 38 years of practice, I had sat across from dozens of men exactly like Brent. Men who realize the financial walls are closing in and decide that physical intimidation is their last remaining asset. They always lean in too close, they always talk too much, and they always, without exception, say the one thing they should have kept to themselves. "Where is the old man?" Brent said, his finger jabbing toward my face. "You think you're so smart hiding him away? Wade is not playing games anymore." I said nothing. I kept my hands at my sides and my eyes level. Brent slammed his open palm against my driver's side window hard enough to make the glass shudder in its frame. Then he leaned in close enough that I could see the burst capillaries in his eyes, and said the words that changed the shape of this entire fight. "The banks are calling my house now," he said, his voice dropping to a raw, desperate register. "He used my business as collateral for one of his loans. My excavation company, my trucks, my house. If that ranch doesn't sell by the end of the month, they take everything I've built in 20 years. Why would Brent Oakley, a man with no direct stake in the conservatorship, drive across 2 towns to threaten me in a parking lot unless he was about to lose everything he owned?" The answer recalibrated everything. Wade had not merely stolen from his father and manipulated his sister. He had used Brent's business as collateral, chaining his associate's livelihood to the ranch sale. If the conservatorship failed and the ranch stayed in the trust, the bank would come for Brent's company instead. Every person in Wade's orbit was financially tethered to his desperation. This was not a family dispute. It was a sinking ship, and everyone on board was willing to drown an 87-year-old man to keep it afloat. Brent was still talking. His voice had shifted from threatening to pleading and back again, oscillating between the two the way desperate men always do. "You need to stop playing the hero," he said. "You're getting between desperate people and their survival. Accidents happen to people who get in the way. Walk away before someone gets seriously hurt." He held my gaze for a long moment, his breath fogging in the January cold between us. Then he stepped back, climbed into his truck, and reversed out of the lot with his tires squealing against the frozen asphalt. I did not flinch. I did not speak. I did not move until his taillights disappeared around the corner of the suburban street. Then I calmly shifted my gaze upward to the tiny, steady red light blinking behind my rearview mirror. I had gone to the grocery store for oatmeal and bottled water. I was leaving with felony criminal intimidation captured in crystal clear high definition. And the man who handed it to me had no idea he had just loaded the gun pointed at his own head. The dash cam was motion activated. Sterling had suggested I install it on day 1. A small, unobtrusive unit mounted behind the mirror that recorded continuously whenever it detected movement within 6 feet of the vehicle. Brent had parked his truck directly in front of it. He had slammed his palm against the window directly beneath it. He had delivered an explicit threat of physical violence with his face centered perfectly in the wide-angle lens. I reached up and pressed the sync button. The status bar on my phone filled steadily as the video uploaded to my encrypted cloud server. Every word, every gesture, every bead of sweat on his forehead. Sterling was going to love this. I sat in the truck for a long time after the upload completed, watching the parking lot empty out in the late afternoon light. The grocery bag sat beside me, the oatmeal shifting against the bottled water with every breath of wind that rocked the cab. Brent's threat was now evidence. Wade's financial web was wider than I had imagined. And back at the Residence Inn, a signature on a conservatorship filing was still waiting for me. The one piece of confirmation I had been praying would prove me wrong. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot. The red light on the dash cam blinked once more, then went dark. The evidence was already in the cloud, and the evening ahead was going to demand the kind of courage that has nothing to do with parking lot confrontations. I pulled 2 birthday cards from my wallet, one from our 10th anniversary, one from last September, and laid them on the dining table beside the conservatorship filing, under the warm circle of the desk lamp. The comparison took less than 30 seconds. The capital L was the same. The trailing upstroke on the final letter was the same. The slight rightward lean that Lorraine always blamed on being left-handed as a child, identical on both surfaces. I held the anniversary card in one hand and the attestation page in the other, coming them closer together under the light until the handwriting overlapped like transparencies on an overhead projector. I had been praying for a mismatch. The paper gave me none. My wife had picked up a pen, pressed it to that attestation page, and sworn under oath that the sharpest 87-year-old man 3 board-certified psychiatrists had ever tested was cognitively incompetent. That signature was not ignorance. It was not a mistake made under pressure. It was a weapon, deliberately signed and notarized, designed to strip an old man of his legal personhood so her brother could sell everything he had ever built. I sat in the lamplight holding a birthday card that said, "To my forever," in the same handwriting that had just condemned her father. And I understood for the first time that the woman who wrote both had always been the same person. I had simply refused to see it. I put the cards back in my wallet. I placed the attestation page in Sterling's evidence folder, and I closed that chapter of my marriage the way I had closed 1,000 case files in my career, with clean hands and a decision to move forward. Sterling arrived the next morning at 7 with his laptop and a thermos of black coffee. We sat at the dining table while Eugene slept in the bedroom, and we resumed the forensic sweep of the files I had copied from Lorraine's computer. The auditing software had continued its recovery scan overnight. When I opened the results, the program had surfaced a buried folder that Lorraine had deleted and emptied from her recycling bin 3 weeks before Eugene's surgery. The folder contained scanned documents, IRS documents. When someone commits a sudden, reckless act of fraud, it is never random. There is always a ticking clock, a deadline that turned a calculating person into a desperate one. I was about to find Wade's clock. The first document was a final notice of intent to levy from the Internal Revenue Service, addressed to Wade Ellsworth, dated 14 months ago. 7 years of fabricated business expenses, hidden revenue streams, falsified quarterly filings, the cumulative assessment, with penalties and interest, exceeded $3 million. The second document was a letter from a criminal defense attorney at a firm called Farnsworth and Lyle in Boise, addressed to Wade, copied to Lorraine. The letter laid out the reality in the flat, merciless language that lawyers use when they need a client to stop pretending the situation is survivable. Federal tax evasion. Potential prison sentence of up to 5 years. The only path to avoiding indictment was full restitution before the U.S. Attorney's Office formally filed charges. The letter estimated Wade had weeks, not months. 7 years of fabricated expenses, I said aloud, reading from the screen. A final levy notice, and a defense attorney telling him the indictment is imminent. Sterling leaned back in his chair and pressed his fingertips together. "That explains the rush," he said. "He is not just greedy. He is drowning." The conservatorship was never about caring for Eugene. It was about liquidating a $15 million ranch to keep Wade out of a federal penitentiary. $3 million. That was the number staring at me from the IRS letterhead. Wade needed every cent of it before federal marshals showed up at his door. And there was only one asset in the family large enough to cover it. The letter from Farnsworth and Lyle was dated 2 months before the night Wade and Lorraine had cornered Eugene in his study. 2 months of planning. 2 months of preparation. And Lorraine had received a copy of every communication she had known from the beginning that her brother was facing prison. And she had chosen to help him cannibalize their father's legacy, rather than let him face the consequences of his own fraud. I closed the laptop and sat in the silence of the hotel suite. Eugene's breathing rose and fell behind the bedroom door, the slow, trusting rhythm of a man who believed his son-in-law was standing between him and destruction. The mathematics settled over me with the weight of a verdict. Wade owed the federal government $3 million. The money Lorraine had taken from our retirement account, which I now knew went far beyond the initial transfer, I had found was not even a meaningful fraction of that debt. It was the retainer fee. The cost of hiring the criminal defense attorney whose letter was sitting on my screen. She had sacrificed our future to buy a drowning man a few more weeks of air. And there was only one asset in this family worth enough to clear that debt. 350 acres of prime ranch land near Hagerman, appraised at $15 million. Owned by the 87-year-old man sleeping 10 feet away from me. The ranch was not the prize. It was the life raft. And Wade was willing to throw his own father overboard to reach it. I knew the ranch was the target. Now I needed to know how much of my own life Lorraine had burned to keep her brother's ship afloat. I opened the retirement account portal that evening and began pulling statements. The first withdrawal hit our account on a Tuesday in August. $17,000 routed to Gallatin Advisory Group. The same shell company whose name I had found on the deleted bank statement 2 nights ago. That transfer was the one I already knew about. What I did not know was that it had 4 siblings. I lined up 5 months of statements side by side on the hotel desk, arranging them in chronological order, the way I used to arrange evidence exhibits in conference rooms. August, $15,000. September, $25,000. October, $30,000. November, $25,000. December, $25,000. I whispered the numbers aloud like a prosecutor reading charges. 15. 25. 30. 25. 25. $120,000. Our entire retirement cushion. Gone in 5 monthly bites. These were not panicked transfers made by a woman acting under duress. The amounts escalated on a precise schedule, starting conservatively, increasing as she gained confidence that I was not checking the account, then leveling off at a sustainable extraction rate. This was not a single desperate mistake. This was a 5-month siphoning operation, executed with the kind of methodical discipline that would have impressed any embezzler I had ever investigated. You want to believe your spouse made one desperate mistake. You do not want to see 5. You do not want to see a pattern that proves she sat down at the computer every month, logged in with the same password she used for everything, and calmly transferred another chunk of your shared future into a shell company designed to disguise the destination. But I did see it. And the destination was where the story turned from painful to criminal. I traced Gallatin Advisory Group through the Idaho Secretary of State's business filings. The registered agent was not a financial advisor. It was not an investment firm. It was a Boise law office, Farnsworth and Lyle, the same criminal defense firm whose letter I had found in Lorraine's deleted files that morning. The firm Wade had hired to keep him out of federal prison. I cross-referenced the filing date with Wade's court docket, which Sterling had pulled for me earlier that week. Farnsworth and Lyle entered their appearance as Wade's defense counsel on July 19th. Lorraine's first withdrawal landed on August 2nd. 14 days. That was how long it took her to choose her brother over me. How do you file for appearance as defense counsel in July and have your retainer fully funded by someone else's wife by August? You plan it. You coordinate it. You build a billing conduit disguised as an advisory firm so the withdrawals look like portfolio rebalancing instead of what they actually are. A wife systematically draining her family's retirement to fund her brother's criminal defense. Gallatin Advisory was never a real company. It was a funnel, and Lorraine had poured our future through it 1 month at a time. I pulled up the current balance on the retirement account. The number sat on the screen like a death certificate. $4,200. That was what remained from a balance that had once held $124,000. 31 years of combined contributions. 31 years of quarterly statements showing steady growth. 31 years of planning for a retirement that was supposed to include travel, grandchildren, a quiet house near the water. All of it reduced to a number that would not cover 2 months of rent. The final withdrawal, the last $25,000, had cleared on December 22nd, 3 days before Christmas. I stared at that date until my vision blurred. December 22nd, 3 days later. Lorraine had handed me a wrapped box across the living room. Inside was a cashmere scarf, charcoal gray. Expensive. Chosen with care. She had watched me unwrap it with steady hands. Steady hands. The same hands that had authorized the final transfer 72 hours earlier, emptying the last of everything we had built together. She had kissed my cheek on Christmas morning and said she hoped I liked the color. She sacrificed our retirement for a criminal, I said to the empty room. The words hung in the air of the hotel suite like smoke. Eugene's breathing rose and fell behind the bedroom door, steady and trusting. I printed every statement, every routing confirmation, every Secretary of State filing. 12 pages of evidence that my wife had methodically funded her brother's criminal defense with our shared retirement account. One surgical withdrawal at a time, while sleeping beside me every night and asking how my day was every morning. I stacked the pages into a folder and was about to close the laptop when one line item on Wade's court docket caught my eye. A motion I had not seen before. Filed 6 days ago, requesting an emergency lien on real property belonging to a family member. The property description matched the ranch acreage. County, parcel number. Wade was not just trying to gain conservatorship anymore. He was trying to place a legal claim directly on the land itself. A lien that, once recorded, would cloud the title and prevent Eugene from selling, transferring, or borrowing against his own property. The walls were closing in from a direction I had not anticipated, and the clock attached to that lien was already ticking. I called Lorraine at 6 in the morning and told her to meet me at the coffee shop on Eagle Road. Alone. No Wade. No excuses. She agreed without arguing, which told me she had been expecting this call. The lien motion could wait a few hours. What could not wait was looking into the eyes of the woman who had signed away her father's mind and stolen our retirement, and hearing her explain it in her own voice. I arrived 30 minutes early. The coffee shop was a quiet place on the corner of Eagle and Fairview. Wooden tables, exposed brick, the kind of establishment where people discussed real estate deals and custody arrangements in low voices. I ordered black coffee, sat at a corner table with my back to the wall, and arranged 12 pages of evidence in chronological order. Bank statements, routing confirmations, the conservatorship attestation with her signature. I did not rehearse anything. 12 pages of financial records are their own closing argument. The barista asked if I was waiting for someone. I said I was not sure yet. Lorraine walked in at 7:15 looking like she had not slept in days. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back without care. She was 57 years old, and she looked 70. She sat across from me, and her gaze landed on the folder immediately. "Corbin, please," she said. "Let me explain before you—" I slid the first page across the table. The August statement. The one that started everything. "What is Gallatin Advisory Group?" I asked. "You think you will be angry when the moment comes. You are not. You are just hollow." She looked at the routing number on the page and her hand went to her mouth. She did not ask what it was. She did not pretend to be confused. She recognized it on sight. Every digit, every sequence, because she had typed those numbers into the transfer portal herself. 5 times. Across 5 consecutive months. I slid the second page across. September. Then October. November. December. 5 statements fanned across the table between us like a hand of cards in a game she had already lost. She did not deny a single one. Lorraine pressed her palms flat against the table, the same gesture I had made 2 nights ago when I first saw her handwriting on the attestation page, and began to speak. "Wade came to me in July," she said. Her voice was low and stripped of every performance I had heard over the past week. He said he had a tax situation. He said Farnsworth and Lyle needed a retainer to begin restructuring his debt, and the money would be returned within 90 days through a settlement. He called it a bridge loan document. Sign here, notarize here, 90 days and it all comes back. 5 times, I said. You believed him 5 separate times across 5 separate months. How many times can someone say, just one more month, before it stops being a lie and becomes a lifestyle? Lorraine's eyes filled. Not the theatrical tears she had produced for Deputy Holt. These were different. Raw. Involuntary. The kind that come when a person runs out of walls to hide behind. The first time, I believed him, she said. The second time, I was afraid to ask questions. By October, I knew the money was not coming back. But I had already signed the papers. I had already moved the funds. If I stopped, everything I had already done would be exposed. Wade said if I just kept going a little longer, the deal would close and he would make it all right. And the conservatorship papers, I said. The attestation page. She closed her eyes. He told me it was collateral documentation for the loan restructuring. I signed it at his kitchen table. He had a notary there, someone he brought. I did not read every page. I trusted him. You certified in writing that your father was losing his mind. Lorraine, you signed a legal document that could have put him in a locked psychiatric ward under Wade's control. She was not crying for forgiveness. She was crying because she had finally run out of ways to hide. I didn't know how to stop, she whispered. The coffee shop was nearly empty. Morning light fell across the table in long, pale rectangles. The evidence sat between us, 5 months of betrayal laid out in black ink on white paper. Lorraine's hands trembled against the wood. Then she wiped her eyes and said there was one more thing. Something she had not told anyone, not even Wade. Last week, while Wade was out of the house, she had found a second set of documents in his briefcase, already prepared, already dated, already notarized by the same person who had witnessed the conservatorship papers. A power of attorney assigning Wade full control of Eugene's medical decisions. I sat very still. Wade was not just after the ranch. He was building a legal cage around his own father's financial control through the conservatorship, physical control through the psychiatric hold, and now medical control through a power of attorney that would let him authorize sedation, relocation, or end-of-life decisions without Eugene ever having a say. The man was not desperate. He was systematic, and he was not finished. Sterling Harrington called me at 7 that evening and said 4 words. I found the buyer. The power of attorney Lorraine had described was terrifying enough. But what Sterling brought to the residence inn an hour later made the medical documents look like a footnote. He sat at the dining table, opened his briefcase, and spread 6 printed emails across the surface. Correspondence between Wade Ellsworth and a company called Ridgeline Development Group, a commercial land developer based in Boise. The earliest email was dated 5 months ago, 2 full months before Wade filed the conservatorship petition. He wasn't trying to save the ranch or restructure debt, Sterling said. Tapping the first printout. He was flipping it. 5 months of negotiations with a developer who wants to turn 350 acres of ranch land into a mixed-use commercial complex. I picked up the emails and read them in order. The language was careful, but the intent was naked. Wade had initiated contact. Wade had provided acreage surveys, soil reports, and a preliminary site map. Wade had discussed pricing, closing timelines, and this was the detail that made my jaw clench. Title clearance procedures. The developer's offer was $4.2 million for the entire property, contingent on one condition: clear title, established through conservatorship authority over the current owner. The conservatorship was not a shield. It was a crowbar. And the ranch was the door Wade needed to pry open. At $4.2 million, Sterling said, leaning back. Wade clears his federal debt and walks away with over $1 million in cash. That was always the endgame. Not family care. Not financial restructuring. A land deal with his father's name on the deed and a conservatorship as the title-clearing mechanism. I stared at the emails. 5 months of planning. 5 months of negotiating the sale of a property that did not belong to him, while simultaneously engineering the legal machinery to seize it. The conservatorship petition. The fraudulent psychiatric hold. The stolen retirement funds to pay the defense attorney. The power of attorney for medical decisions. Every piece was a component in a single machine designed to strip an 87-year-old man of everything he had. His land, his autonomy, his dignity, and convert it into cash. Then Sterling showed me the thread that made my stomach turn. Buried in the email chain was a message where Wade asked the developer about transition timelines for current occupants. The developer's response referenced a budget-assisted living facility in Twin Falls, a shared room facility 2 hours from the ranch. 2 hours from any family. 2 hours from everything Eugene had known for 6 decades. Wade had already requested brochures. He had already asked about pricing. Shared room. $2,800 a month. That was the price tag Wade had put on his own father's remaining years. He was going to warehouse his father in the cheapest facility he could find and disappear with the money, I said. Sterling nodded. And Lorraine was never told about the developer. The emails were only between Wade and Ridgeline. She thought the conservatorship was about debt restructuring. She had no idea her brother was planning to sell the ranch out from under the entire family. I heard a sound behind me and turned. Eugene stood in the doorway of the adjoining bedroom. He was wearing the flannel shirt he had slept in. One hand braced against the doorframe, his face lit by the warm glow of the desk lamp. He had been listening. I did not know for how long. Sterling and I froze. "How long has he been planning this?" Eugene asked. His voice was quiet and level, the dangerous kind of quiet, the kind that comes from a place deeper than anger. 5 months, I said. Maybe longer. Eugene walked slowly to the desk and picked up the emails. He read each one with the deliberate patience of a man who had spent 60 years reading livestock contracts and land surveys. He did not skip a word. He did not ask a question. When he reached the thread about the assisted living facility in Twin Falls, his hand trembled once. A single involuntary tremor, and then went still. He set the pages down and sat on the edge of the bed. "I built that ranch with my bare hands," he said. 60 years. I dug the irrigation channels myself the first summer. I strung the fence wire until my palms bled. I rebuilt after the fire in '89 and the flood in '94. I did all of it so my children would have something when I was gone. He paused. His eyes were open, but he was looking at something neither Sterling nor I could see. "And my son wants to sell it to strangers and put me in a box in Twin Falls." Eugene did not cry. Men who have worked land for 60 years do not cry in front of other men. They just go somewhere inside themselves and close the door. He closed his eyes and sat on the edge of that bed for a long time. Sterling looked at me. I looked at the floor. The hotel suite was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of an old man breathing through the worst discovery of his life. Then Eugene opened his eyes and looked at me with a stillness that made the room feel 10 degrees colder. "Call your lawyer," he said. "I want to fight, and I want Wade to know it's coming." We spent the first hour of day 6 building the most convincing lie I had ever helped construct. Gene wanted war, and Sterling and I were going to give it to him, but not the kind Wade would see coming. The 3 of us sat at the dining table of the hotel suite with a laptop, a legal pad, and 3 cups of coffee that went cold before anyone took a second sip. Sterling drafted the language. I checked the financial references. Eugene watched, asked sharp questions, and signed the final page with a hand that trembled, though not entirely from acting. The document was a settlement agreement. On its face, it looked like total capitulation. Eugene Ellsworth, 87 years of age, agrees to transfer all 350 acres of the Ellsworth family ranch to his son Wade Ellsworth in exchange for the immediate withdrawal of all conservatorship proceedings. The language was defeated, exhausted, resigned. It read like a tired old man who had finally given up. It was also, by design, legally worthless. Sterling had embedded 3 procedural flaws so subtle that only an attorney who specialized in Idaho property law would catch them. A missing notarization clause on the transfer page, a jurisdictional reference that cited the wrong county code, and a signature block that failed to include the required spousal waiver. Any one of those defects would void the agreement on challenge. Together, they made the document a time bomb disguised as a white flag. It needs to feel like surrender. Sterling said, reviewing the final draft, Wade's greed is the vulnerability. He will not read the fine print if the headline says he wins. You might think lying to family makes you no better than them. But there is a difference between a lie that steals and a lie that protects. We were not forging a weapon to take something from Wade. We were building a mirror, letting his own greed show him exactly what he wanted to see, so he would lower every guard he had left. Eugene signed the last page, set the pen down, and looked at me. I have been tired before, he said. Never been defeated, but I can pretend for one document. I called Lorraine. She arrived at the hotel at noon, and I met her in the hallway outside the suite, so Eugene would not have to see her. I explained the plan in plain language. She needed to deliver this document to Wade and frame it as her own doing. Tell him she had worn me down, convinced me to give up, brokered the surrender on her own initiative. Wade needed to believe his sister had delivered him the victory he had been scheming for. Lorraine stared at the envelope in my hands. If he finds out I'm lying to him, she said, he'll cut me off completely. He already cut you off. Lorraine, I said. He just let you keep paying the bills. When does a sister stop being an accomplice and start being a soldier? I watched the calculation move across her face, the fear, the guilt, the exhaustion, and finally something harder and quieter underneath all of it. Something that looked like the first real decision she had made in months. Give me the envelope, she said. She took it without opening it. She put it in her purse, zipped the purse shut, and walked down the hallway toward the elevator without looking back. Her shoes clicked against the tile in a steady rhythm, not fast, not slow. The pace of a woman who had made up her mind. I watched her step into the elevator. The doors closed. She was gone. I went back into the suite and called Sterling. She's on her way, I said. How fast can you file once he bites? I have had the real motion drafted since midnight, Sterling said. His voice carried the flat, satisfied tone of a man who had been building something in the dark and was finally ready to turn on the lights. The moment Wade accepts the surrender and withdraws his legal actions, we file the emergency motion, submit the psychiatric evaluations, present the dashcam footage, and deliver the full financial evidence package to the district attorney. He disarms himself, and we strike before he can rearm. I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed. Eugene was in his armchair, blanket across his lap, eyes closed but not sleeping. The suite was quiet. The trap was set. Lorraine was carrying the bait through the streets of Meridian toward a man who believed his sister would never betray him the same way he had believed his father would never fight back. Lorraine walked through those lobby doors carrying a grenade disguised as a white flag, and Wade was about to reach for it with both hands. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. A text from a number I did not recognize. No name, no contact information. 3 words. I know everything. No signature. No follow-up. No second message. I stared at those 3 words and felt the trap we had spent the morning building start to rattle. Someone outside our inner circle, outside this hotel room, outside Sterling's office, outside the careful perimeter we had constructed around Eugene, knew what we were doing. And I had no idea whether that person was an ally trying to help or a threat about to blow the entire operation apart. The phone sat heavy in my hand. Eugene opened one eye from his armchair and looked at me. Problem? He asked. Maybe, I said. I'll know by morning. The anonymous text kept me awake most of the night. I ran the number through every search tool I had. No match, no carrier name, no registration. A burner phone or an internet relay. Whoever sent those 3 words wanted me to know they were watching, without revealing who they were or which side they stood on. Then, at 9:14 the next morning, the mystery became secondary. Sterling's phone chimed with an automated notification from the Ada County court system. He read it aloud from the armchair, and his voice carried the barely contained disbelief of a man watching his opponent walk into a trap with both arms open. "Petition withdrawn," he said. "Psychiatric hold canceled. Wade Ellsworth has formally withdrawn his emergency conservatorship petition and all associated medical orders. He just threw both guns in the river because he thinks the war is over." I sat on the edge of the bed and let that sink in. Wade had surrendered every piece of legal leverage he possessed to conservatorship that could have seized Eugene's autonomy. The psychiatric hold that could have locked him in a facility. All of it traded for a piece of paper that Sterling had deliberately designed to self-destruct. "How long until he realizes the surrender document is worthless?" I asked. "Not until we are standing in front of a judge with the real filing," Sterling said. "Greed makes you stupid in a very specific way. It makes you stop checking for traps because you are too busy counting the prize." Wade had spent months building a legal machine to seize his father's ranch, and he had dismantled it overnight because he believed his sister had delivered him the deed on a silver platter. He never questioned the document. He never had his own attorney review it. He simply saw the headline, "Eugene surrenders," and swallowed it whole. Lorraine called at noon. "He took it," she said. Her voice was steady but thin, like a wire under tension. "He read the first page, smiled, and told me I had done the right thing." "He didn't read past page 3. "Good. What's next?" The court scheduled an emergency hearing at Ada County Courthouse for tomorrow morning. "He wants to watch Dad sign the deed transfer in person." She paused. "He asked what kind of pen Dad prefers. He wants it to feel ceremonial. What kind of son turns a courtroom hearing into a stage to watch his 87-year-old father sign away his life's work and calls it a ceremony? The kind who has already spent the money in his head. The kind who has already told the developer the deal is done. The kind who has been planning his father's disposal for 5 months, and now believes the last obstacle just removed itself. Let him plan his ceremony, I said. We will bring the real paperwork. I hung up and briefed Eugene. He sat in his armchair and listened, without interrupting, the way he had listened to every piece of devastating news over the past week. When I finished, he stood up slowly, walked to the hotel window, and looked out at the January sky over Eagle. The window framed him in pale gray light. His reflection was faint in the glass thin surgical scar beneath his shirt, hands steady at his sides. He did not look like a man who had just survived open-heart surgery and a week in hiding. He looked like a man who had been waiting his entire life for one specific fight. What does he think will happen when I don't sign? Eugene asked without turning around. Sterling answered from the armchair. He will threaten. He will bluff. He will try to intimidate you the way he did in your study. And then we file the real motion, present the psychiatric evaluations, submit the dashcam footage, and deliver the full financial evidence to the judge and the district attorney simultaneously. By the time he understands what happened, the cage will already be closed. Eugene was quiet for a long moment. His breath fogged a small circle on the cold glass. Good, he said. I want to see his face when he understands. Eugene stood at that window like a man sharpening a blade still on the outside. Lethal underneath. 60 years of building a ranch from nothing. 60 years of droughts and floods and fires and the slow, grinding patience of working land that fought you every season. He had survived all of it. And tomorrow morning, he was going to walk into a courthouse and show his son what survival actually looks like. I laid out clothes for the morning. A clean shirt for Eugene, a fresh tie for myself. Sterling had his briefcase packed and his filings organized in labeled tabs. We were ready. The trap was set. The bait had been taken, and Wade had disarmed himself completely. As I turned off the lights that night, my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. This time it was not a text. It was a photo. I opened it and felt my pulse jump. A screenshot of an email from Wade to the developer at Ridgeline, time-stamped 3 hours ago. Wade was confirming the closing timeline, promising clear title by the end of the week. He still believed the deal was alive. Someone on the inside was feeding us intelligence. Not warnings anymore. Active operational support. Screenshots of private correspondence that only someone with access to Wade's email could have captured. I stared at the photo in the dark hotel room and asked myself the question that had been circling since yesterday. Who was this person, and what did they want in return? The phone went dark. Tomorrow was the courthouse. Tomorrow, everything landed. I did not sleep that night. By dawn, I still had no answer about the anonymous source. But I had something better. A courthouse appointment and a briefcase full of evidence that was about to end this war. Wade Ellsworth walked into the courtroom at Ada County Courthouse wearing a suit that cost more than most people's mortgage payment and a smile that said he had already won. The room was small. Oak table, 6 chairs, fluorescent lights, a single window overlooking the parking lot. Wade took the head of the table without being invited, unbuttoned his jacket, and placed a silver Montblanc pen at the center of the deed transfer polished. Expensive. Chosen specifically for the occasion. Brent Oakley sat to his right, thick arms crossed, jaw set. Lorraine sat to Wade's left, eyes down, performing the exhausted peacemaker one final time. Sterling and I sat across from them. Eugene sat between us, back straight, hands flat on the table. He had not spoken since we left the hotel. Wade slid the deed toward his father and placed the pen on top. "Dad, this is the best thing for everyone," he said, his voice warm and rehearsed. "You sign, the legal mess goes away, and we all move forward as a family. I even brought your favorite pen. You deserve a dignified moment." There is a particular kind of silence that fills a room when a man who thinks he has won realizes the game has not even started yet. It does not announce itself. It settles in, like frost cold, quiet, and impossible to ignore once you feel it. Eugene looked at the pen, then at his son, then at me. He placed both hands on the deed, slid it back across the table, and left the pen untouched. "My client declines," Sterling said. Wade's smile flickered but held. "Sterling, this has already been agreed to." Lorraine brokered it. "And before you respond, Mr. Ellsworth." Sterling continued, opening his briefcase with surgical precision. "I would suggest you review what we filed with the court this morning." I reached into the briefcase and began. 4 documents. 12 pages. Years of fraud laid out in a stack no thicker than a restaurant menu. I placed the first document on the table and turned it so Wade could read the header. Page 1. IRS Form 8300 discrepancies tied to your business accounts. 7 years of fabricated expenses. A cumulative federal liability exceeding $3 million. Wade's fingers curled against the table's edge. I placed the second document beside it. Sequential withdrawals from a joint retirement account routed through Gallatin Advisory Group to your criminal defense firm. $120,000 authorized over 5 months. Lorraine kept her eyes on the table. She did not move. I placed the third. 3 independent psychiatric evaluations confirming Eugene Ellsworth is of sound mind and exceptional cognitive function. The fraudulent hold signed by Dr. Caldwell has been referred to the Medical Licensing Board. Brent shifted in his chair. The leather creaked beneath him. I placed the fourth. A dashcam recording from a parking lot in Nampa. Mr. Oakley threatening physical violence against me while demanding Eugene's location. Crystal clear audio and video. Already submitted to the Ada County District Attorney. Brent's chair scraped backward 6 inches. He did not look at Wade. He looked at the door. The room was silent. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The Mont Blanc pen sat untouched on the table between us, gleaming under the artificial light like a monument to a victory that never existed. Wade stared at the documents. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. The color left his face in stages. First the cheeks, then the forehead, then the skin around his eyes, until he looked like a man carved from gray wax. Then his head snapped toward Lorraine. You can't just... His voice cracked upward, pitching between rage and panic. Lorraine, what did you tell them? He did not ask about the IRS filing. He did not ask about the dashcam footage. He did not ask how we had obtained 5 months of banking records. His first instinct, his only instinct, was to turn on his sister, the woman who had stolen from her own husband to fund his defense, the woman who had signed the attestation page, the woman who had delivered his fake surrender document with steady hands and a straight face. Wade's confidence did not crack. It vaporized like a window hit by a bullet you never heard coming. Sterling let the silence hold for 3 full seconds. Then he spoke with the measured calm of a man who had been building toward this sentence for 8 days. The federal referral was submitted yesterday. Mr. Ellsworth, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the Ada County District Attorney both received the complete evidence package this morning. He paused. This meeting is not a negotiation. It is a courtesy. Wade's eyes locked on the IRS seal at the top of the first page, and his face went the color of ash. Brent Oakley was already pushing his chair back from the table, one hand reaching for his jacket on the back of the chair, calculating the distance to the door. And Eugene sat perfectly still between Sterling and me, watching his son, with the quiet patience of a man who had waited 8 days for this exact moment. Wade lunged for the transfer deed like a drowning man reaching for driftwood, and Sterling got there first. Sterling's hand closed over the document before Wade's fingers touched the paper. He picked it up, held it under the fluorescent light so everyone at the table could see Eugene's name printed on the unsigned signature line, and tore it cleanly in half. The sound of ripping paper filled the courtroom like a gunshot. "That's a legal document," Wade shouted, half rising from his chair. "You can't just—" "It is not a legal document, Mr. Ellsworth," Sterling said, laying the 2 halves on the table with the deliberate care of a man displaying evidence at a murder trial. "It is a prop. It was designed to be a prop. And now I am going to show you why." Sterling reached into his briefcase and produced a single document, a certified copy, stamped and sealed, bound with a blue legal backing. He placed it at the center of the table where the deed had been, and the room changed temperature. "The Ellsworth family ranch," Sterling said, his voice steady and unhurried, "has been held in an irrevocable blind trust since 2019. Eugene Ellsworth is the beneficiary. He is not the owner." Wade's mouth opened. No sound came out. The trust was established 7 years ago and filed with the Ada County Recorder's Office. Sterling continued. The property was transferred out of Eugene's personal name and into the trust instrument at that time. Eugene retained the right to live on the land and benefit from its income, but he cannot sell it, transfer it, or encumber it with debt. No conservator appointed over Eugene would have authority over the trust assets, because the assets do not belong to Eugene. They belong to the trust. Sterling paused to let that settle. The conservatorship petition, the deed transfer, the developer deal with Ridgeline, none of it was ever going to work. You spent 5 months building a machine to seize an asset that has been legally untouchable since the day the trust was recorded. 5 months of scheming. $120,000 stolen from my retirement, 3 fraudulent filings, a forged psychiatric hold, a parking lot threat. All of it aimed at a target that had been beyond Wade's reach for 7 years. Wade turned to Eugene. His face had shifted from shock to something raw, the desperate, searching expression of a child who still believes his parent can undo reality. "Dad," he said, "tell me that's not true." Eugene looked at his son for the first time since the meeting began. His eyes were clear and steady and utterly without mercy. "I asked Corbin to protect the ranch from exactly this," Eugene said. "Turns out I was right to worry. The trust was the instrument I had drafted during my final year of active practice." Eugene had come to me in 2019 with a concern he could not articulate precisely, but felt in his bones. A worry that someday, someone in his family would try to take the ranch from him. He did not name Wade specifically. He did not accuse anyone. He simply said he wanted the land protected in a way that no court order, no power of attorney, and no family pressure could undo. So I built him an irrevocable blind trust. I structured it so that the property could never be sold, transferred, or leveraged without the trustee's written authorization. The trustee was not Eugene. The trustee was not Wade. The trustee was not Lorraine. Lorraine looked up from the table for the first time. Her eyes moved from Sterling to the trust document, to the torn halves of the deed. "Who is the trustee?" she asked. Sterling pointed at me without looking away from Wade. The room went still. Wade's gaze shifted from his father to me, and I watched the full architecture of his defeat assemble behind his eyes. The son-in-law, the quiet man with the tackle box, the retiree he had dismissed as irrelevant for a decade, the man he had never once asked about his career or his capabilities or his history. That man, the one sitting across the table in a borrowed tie, held the only legal key to 350 acres of Idaho ranch land. "You," Wade said. His voice was low, stripped of performance, vibrating with something that sounded less like anger and more like the specific fury of a man who has just discovered he was outplayed before the game began. "You did this. You've been planning this the entire time. How do you explain to a con man that the mark he spent half a year hunting was never carrying the wallet? You do not explain. You let the silence do the work." I held Wade's gaze across the table and said nothing. Sterling said nothing. Eugene said nothing. Lorraine's hand found Eugene's arm and rested there, the first time she had touched her father without performance or agenda since this crisis began. Wade stood up so fast his chair hit the wall behind him. The sound cracked through the room like a slap. His face had moved past shock, past fury, into something older and more dangerous. The look of a man calculating whether violence would change the math. Brent Oakley was already gone. His chair was empty. The door to the hallway stood open where he had slipped out during Sterling's presentation. Lorraine had her hand on Eugene's arm. Eugene had his eyes on his son, and Wade's eyes had not left mine. Eugene's voice cut through the room like a blade wrapped in velvet quiet, unhurried and impossible to ignore. "Sit down." "Wade?" 2 words. That was all it took. Wade's fists unclenched one finger at a time, and he dropped into his chair like a marionette whose strings had been cut. I watched Eugene rise from his seat at the plaintiff's table, and for the first time in 8 days, the old man didn't look fragile. He looked like the rancher who'd broken Mustangs at 19, the father who'd raised 3 children through Idaho winters that killed livestock, the man who'd buried his wife and kept standing. He looked like exactly who he was, an 87-year-old who'd simply had enough. "Your Honor," Eugene said, turning to Judge Alderman, "I'd like to address the court directly, with your permission." Alderman studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Go ahead." "Mr. Ellsworth?" Eugene stepped past Sterling's table. He didn't use his cane. I noticed because I'd been carrying that cane to his truck every morning for 3 years, and I'd never once seen him leave it behind voluntarily. Here's something most people misunderstand about forgiveness. They think it's soft. They think it means you've forgotten what was done to you, or that you're too weak to fight back. But I'd spent 38 years preparing tax returns for people who destroyed each other over inheritances, and I'd learned one truth that never varied. The cruelest punishment you can inflict on someone who betrayed you for money is to offer them a chance they don't deserve. because then they have to live knowing they needed mercy. "I'm not here to destroy my daughter," Eugene said. The courtroom went silent. Not quiet silent. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. Lorraine's head snapped up. Wade leaned forward. Sterling turned to me with a question in his eyes, and I gave him the smallest nod I could manage. Because Eugene and I had discussed this at his kitchen table 2 nights ago. Over coffee that had gone cold while he talked about what Margaret would have wanted. Margaret. His wife of 51 years. Dead 6 years now. And still the compass he steered by. "Lorraine," Eugene said, and his voice carried a gentleness that made my chest ache. "You stole $120,000 from me. You conspired to have me declared incompetent. You tried to take my ranch, the land your mother and I built our life on, and sell it to developers who'd have paved over her garden within a month." Lorraine's attorney placed a hand on her arm. She shook it off. "But you're still my daughter." I watched Lorraine's face crack open like river ice in March, not all at once, but in fractures that spread from her eyes to her mouth to the trembling line of her jaw. These weren't the performative tears she'd produced during her testimony on day 3. These came from somewhere deeper. Somewhere she'd bricked over with rationalizations and Wade's whispered justifications. "I've instructed Sterling to establish a conditional fund." Eugene continued. $200,000 held in trust. "If you complete a financial accountability program, sever all joint business arrangements with Wade Ellsworth, and submit to quarterly audits for 3 years, the money is yours. Not the ranch. Never the ranch. But enough to start over. If starting over is what you actually want." Wade shot to his feet. "This is a setup." "Mr. Ellsworth, you will sit down or you will be removed," Judge Alderman said, and the bailiff took one step forward that communicated everything words couldn't. Wade sat. But here's the twist nobody in that courtroom expected, including me. Eugene turned to Wade next, and the gentleness drained from his voice like water through a cracked basin. "As for you," Eugene said, "there will be no fund, no conditions, no path back. You orchestrated the fraud. You recruited Dr. Caldwell to sign that psychiatric evaluation. You brought your business partner to dig on my land without permits." Eugene's hand trembled, but his voice held steady as fence wire. "The criminal referral stands. Every charge. Lorraine had weakness in her. I can forgive weakness. But you had calculation. And I will not forgive that." The distinction landed like a hammer on glass. Lorraine redeemable, Wade condemned. And by separating them publicly, Gene had done something more devastating than any legal filing could accomplish. He'd given Lorraine a reason to turn on the man who'd led her here. I looked at Wade and saw the exact moment he understood. His jaw worked soundlessly. His eyes darted to Lorraine, searching for the alliance that had sustained him through every scheme, every forged document, every lie told in Eugene's living room while the old man slept upstairs. Lorraine wouldn't meet his gaze. "Lorraine," Sterling said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the aisle to her attorney. "These are the conditions. You have 72 hours to accept or decline." She didn't need 72 hours. She didn't even need 72 seconds. "I accept," Lorraine whispered. Her hands shook so badly the paper rattled against the table. Tears tracked through her foundation in gray lines, and she pressed her palm flat against the document as if anchoring herself to the only solid thing left in her life. Eugene closed his eyes, just for a moment, and I saw his lips move in a word that might have been Margaret. Sterling didn't wait for Wade to come back inside. He delivered the final strike to the empty chair. Wade had stormed into the hallway after Lorraine's acceptance, and the heavy door was still swinging shut when Sterling stood, straightened his tie, and addressed the room as if he were reading last rites. "For the record," he said, "all documentary evidence, financial records, recorded statements, medical correspondence, and notarized affidavits was transmitted to the Ada County District Attorney and IRS Criminal Investigation at 9 o'clock this morning. He paused, letting the words settle like dust after a detonation. The referral covers perjury, elder abuse, criminal intimidation, and federal tax evasion. I'd suggest everyone in this room who isn't my client retain separate counsel by end of business today. Brent Oakley went white. Not pale white, the color of a man watching his future collapse in real time. He started to speak, stopped, then pushed back from the table hard enough that his chair barked against the tile floor. That was when Wade came back in. He must have heard Sterling's voice through the door, because he entered already furious, his face blotched red from the jawline up. He pointed at Brent with a finger that shook. "You recorded me. You brought a camera into my father's hospital room and you recorded—" "I didn't record anything," Brent said, and his voice cracked on the last syllable. "That was your sister's husband, and you told me there was no risk. You said the old man was finished. You said Sterling Harrington was a paper tiger who'd fold the minute we pushed back." Wade's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Watching them tear into each other was like watching two men fight over a life raft that was already sinking. All fury and no strategy. Each one trying to shove the other underwater, without realizing the ocean didn't care which of them drowned first. "No," Brent said, standing now, his chair toppled behind him. "I'm not as exposed as you, because I didn't forge a doctor's signature. I didn't recruit Caldwell. I didn't steal from an 87-year-old man's bank account while he was recovering from pneumonia." The room smelled like burnt coffee and sweat, and I'd heard enough. I put my hand on Eugene's shoulder, the wool of his blazer rough under my palm, and we walked out together. Behind us, Wade and Brent were still screaming, their voices ricocheting off the courtroom walls like gunshots in a canyon. Eugene didn't look back. Neither did I. In the truck, he leaned his head against the window and closed his eyes. I started the engine and pulled out of the courthouse lot. And we drove 3 miles before either of us spoke. "Margaret would have handled it better," he said quietly. "Margaret would have handled it exactly the same way," I told him. And I meant it. 4 days later, I sat across from Lorraine at a coffee shop in Meridian. The same place where we'd had our anniversary breakfast 11 years ago. She'd chosen it. And I didn't know if that was intentional or just muscle memory guiding her to familiar ground. How do you sit across from someone you loved for 31 years and negotiate the terms of walking away? There's no manual, no precedent in any tax code I ever studied. You just sit there with your coffee going cold and try to say the truest thing you can find. "I'm not going to drag you through court," I said. "Your father asked me to protect you, and I keep my promises, even the ones that cost me." Lorraine stared at her hands. Her nails were unpainted for the first time I could remember, bitten down to the quick. The woman who'd never left the house without lipstick and a manicure looked like she'd aged 5 years and 8 days. "The evidence stays in Sterling's safe," I continued. "It won't be used in divorce proceedings. That's not a negotiation, it's a decision I've already made." "Why?" she whispered. "Because your father chose mercy. And he asked me to do the same. And because destroying you won't undestroy what we had." She pressed her fingertips against her eyelids. The coffee between us sent up a thin curl of steam that neither of us watched. "Is there any chance?" she asked. "For us? Any at all?" Forgiveness isn't something you give all at once. It's a door you leave unlocked and see if the other person earns their way through. I'd learned that from Eugene, who'd learned it from Margaret, who'd probably learned it from someone whose name none of us would ever know. It was inherited wisdom, passed down like the ranch itself. "That depends on what you do next," I said. She nodded. Then she reached into her purse and set a folded piece of paper on the table between us. Her hand steadied for the first time all morning. "The anonymous texts you've been getting," she said. "They weren't from me, but I know who sent them." She slid the paper across the table. I unfolded it and read a name I hadn't expected, someone who'd been invisible through this entire fight. Someone I'd never once suspected of standing guard. The name on the paper was Diane Dunhill. I stared at it long enough that Lorraine set her coffee down and waited. Diane Dunhill, 54 years old. Wade's legal secretary for 11 years. The woman who'd typed every filing, organized every folder, scheduled every meeting in his practice. She'd prepared the conservatorship petition herself. And then, according to what Lorraine had pieced together in the weeks since the courthouse, she'd spent the next 5 months methodically ensuring it would fail. The anonymous texts, the scanned bank statements that arrived in my email from an address I couldn't trace, the tip about Dr. Caldwell's prior disciplinary action. All of it had come from a woman who sat 12 feet from Wade's desk every working day, who smiled at him each morning and handed him his messages, and who went home each night and dismantled his scheme one document at a time. I folded the paper and slid it into my shirt pocket. Lorraine watched me do it and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say about Diane Dunhill that the evidence hadn't already said for her. She never wanted anything in return. Lorraine told me later, Diane had watched Wade manipulate elderly clients before cases the firm quietly settled and never reported. This time, she said, she couldn't look away. Diane had opened every door. I'd only been smart enough to step inside. 3 days later, Lorraine walked into Sterling's office for her deposition. I wasn't in the room. Sterling had advised against it, said my presence could complicate the evidentiary record. So I sat in the reception area on a leather chair that smelled like furniture polish and old paper. And I waited. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to count heartbeats. I heard nothing through the closed door. Not a raised voice. Not a pause. Not a single moment where Lorraine's nerves seemed to falter. Because the receptionist would have noticed, and she never looked up from her screen. 4 hours. That's how long Lorraine was in that room. When she came out, her eyes were swollen but dry. She carried nothing, no folder, no tissue, no shield of any kind. She stopped in front of my chair and stood there. And for the first time since this crisis began, she met my eyes without flinching. "It's done," she said. "All of it. Every transfer, every signature, every lie Wade told me to repeat." She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't explain or qualify or soften. She just stood there and let me see her clearly. The woman underneath the rationalizations. The one who'd known all along that what she was doing was wrong and had done it anyway because Wade made it feel inevitable. I stood up. I didn't touch her. I didn't need to. "Thank you," I said. And I meant it the way you mean it when someone finally stops running. 3 weeks passed. February arrived with frozen ground and a sky the color of hammered tin, and I drove Eugene back to Hagerman on a Tuesday morning, when the temperature hadn't climbed above 19 degrees. The ranch in February looked like a painting of survival, frozen fields stretching toward mountains that had been there longer than any family's failures, longer than any forged document or stolen dollar or courtroom argument. The Snake River ran dark and low along the western boundary, and the cattle Eugene leased the south pasture for stood in a cluster near the barn, their breath rising in white columns. We walked the fence line together. Eugene used his cane. Again, the cold made his hips stiff, and I matched his pace without being asked. The frozen grass crunched under our boots like crumpled paper. "You know why I chose you," he said after a while. Not a question. "Because I'm a tax attorney," I said. "Because I knew how to read the financial records." He stopped walking, leaned on the cane, and looked out across his land. 350 acres of frozen earth that 4 people had nearly torn apart. "I didn't choose you because you're a good investigator, Corbin. I chose you because you know how to love someone even when she disappoints you." The wind came across the pasture and cut through my jacket. I didn't zip it higher. "Any attorney could have built the trust," he continued. "Only you would have protected Lorraine inside it. I'd spent 20 years thinking I'd left the law behind when I retired. Jean showed me I'd just been practicing a different kind. The kind that doesn't bill hours or file motions. The kind that sits at kitchen tables and listens to old men talk about their wives and tries to keep families from burning themselves to ash. I closed my old legal notebook, the one I'd carried through every meeting, every deposition, every late-night session at Eugene's kitchen table, and slid it into my coat pocket next to Diane Dunhill's name. I understood now. The most important work of my life had never been inside a file. As we walked back toward the truck, Eugene stopped and pointed to a section of fence near the south pasture. New posts, fresh wire. Work done recently, within the last week. From the look of the disturbed soil. Lorraine came out here last weekend, he said quietly. Didn't tell anyone, just fixed the fence and left. I looked at those posts, standing straight in the frozen ground. Wire strung tight and true. And I understood something no legal document could ever capture. The headline was 6 words long and buried on page 4. Ellsworth sentenced in elder fraud case. I read it standing at the kitchen counter of the small rental I'd taken near the ranch. Coffee going cold in my hand. 18 months federal for the tax charges and perjury, plus full restitution. Brent Oakley had taken a plea on the intimidation count, probation and community service. Which felt about right for a man who'd been more foolish than evil. The article was 4 paragraphs long. No photograph, no quote from the family. I set the newspaper down and waited for something to arrive. Relief. Satisfaction. The vindication I'd imagined during those long nights at Eugene's kitchen table when the outcome was still uncertain. None of it came. What I felt instead was the particular exhaustion of a man who'd spent 2 months dismantling something that should never have been built in the first place. I didn't cut the article out. I didn't save it. Some victories don't belong on a wall. They belong in a drawer you open once a year to remind yourself what people are capable of. And then you close it again. You spend weeks preparing for the explosion. And then it ends in a 6-word headline on page 4. That's how most real battles finish. Not with a roar, but with a folded newspaper and a cup of coffee that's gone cold while you weren't paying attention. I rinsed the mug, left the paper on the counter, and drove to the ranch. Eugene was on the porch in his usual chair, the wooden rocker Margaret had bought at an estate sale in Jerome 40 years ago. Its armrests worn smooth by decades of his hands. He had a wool blanket across his knees and his cane propped against the railing. And he was watching the February sun drop behind the valley like a man who'd earned the right to watch it without worrying about what tomorrow brings. I sat down in the chair beside him. The cold came through the seat slats immediately, sharp against my back. We didn't speak for a long time. The land stretched out in front of us. Frozen pasture running to the river, the mountains beyond catching the last copper light. 350 acres of earth that 4 people had nearly destroyed, and 1 old man had refused to surrender. The ranch in February looked the way forgiveness feels cold on the surface, alive underneath, waiting for a season that hasn't arrived yet, but that you trust is coming because it always has before. A hawk circled above the south pasture, riding a thermal that must have risen off the barn roof. I could smell wood smoke from the stove inside and the faint iron scent of frozen ground. She called me yesterday, Eugene said, breaking the silence the way he always did, without preamble, as if we'd been mid-conversation all along. How was she? First time in 2 weeks she didn't cry on the phone. He adjusted the blanket across his knees. Asked about cattle, whether I'd had the vet out for the heifer with the bad hawk. She's making the payments, I said. First installment cleared last Friday. Eugene nodded slowly. Then the corner of his mouth turned up not quite a smile, but the closest thing to one I'd seen from him since before the hospital. That fence she fixed is holding better than the one I built 30 years ago, he said. I didn't answer, because he wasn't talking about fence posts and wire. He was talking about the thing every parent holds on to long after reason says let go. The belief that your child is still in there somewhere, underneath the damage, capable of becoming someone worth waiting for. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out and read the screen. 2 sentences from Lorraine. No drama, no apology, no negotiation. Finished the second deposition today. Wanted you to know. Hope you're eating something besides hotel food. I held the phone out so Eugene could read it. He leaned forward, squinted at the small screen, and nodded once. That was all. A nod from an 87-year-old man who'd chosen mercy when destruction was easier. Who'd bet his legacy on the possibility that love could outlast betrayal. What do you call a man who had every weapon to destroy his wife's family and chose to build a road back instead? I'd spent 38 years preparing tax returns and thought I understood how people measured value. Eugene taught me that the most valuable things, trust, forgiveness, the stubborn choice to leave a door open, don't appear on any balance sheet. They don't depreciate. They don't transfer. They just endure, quietly, like fence posts set deep in frozen ground. I could use a bowl of chowder, Eugene said, pushing himself up from the rocker with both hands on the armrests. That place in Twin Falls still open? Should be, I said. I helped him down the porch steps, his hand gripping my forearm the way it had that first night at the hospital, firm, trusting. The grip of a man who'd decided I was worth holding on to. I opened the passenger door and waited while he settled in, then walked around to the driver's side. The county road stretched out under the headlights, the same way it had that first night dark. Frozen, leading towards something I couldn't see yet. But this time, the old man beside me was smiling. And somewhere behind us, a woman was fixing fences no one asked her to fix. I put the truck in gear. That was enough. For now. That was enough. I spent 38 years as a tax attorney, thinking I understood how families work. That loyalty was a given, and betrayal was something that happened to other people. I was wrong. My mistake was trusting that love alone would keep the people closest to me honest. If I could go back, I'd have asked harder questions sooner. Don't wait for the crisis to teach you what the quiet moments were already whispering. This family drama taught me something no courtroom ever could, that protecting someone doesn't always mean fighting for them. Sometimes it means giving them a road back from their worst decisions. That's the real life story here. Not the revenge or the courtroom wins, but the choice to leave a door open when every instinct says lock it shut. I believe God put me through this for a reason. To learn that mercy isn't weakness. It's the hardest kind of strength there is. In every revenge story, there comes a moment where you choose who you want to be on the other side of it. The storytelling doesn't end when the verdict lands. It ends when you decide what the pain was for. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your take. Drop a comment and tell me, was my father-in-law right to offer mercy? Or would you have chosen differently? Your honest opinion matters to me. If you know someone who needs to hear a life story like this, share it with them. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you never miss another story like this one. Real family drama, real storytelling. The kind of dad's true revenge that changes everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. This story includes certain fictionalized details for storytelling and reflection. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental. What matters is the lesson. God bless you. And I'll see you in the next one.